Hello and welcome to the LLG Grapevine podcast. You're listening to Helen McGrath, Head of Public Affairs, and I'm once again delighted to be joined by Deborah Evans, LLG's CEO. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you, Helen. And my goodness, what a week. So tell me about your highlights.
Well, in a week where the so-called vicious circles of tax rises predominate the media, the criminal case backlog reaches 65,000, and a man in his 60s has been held over the sycamore gap tree felling. What have you been looking at, Deborah?
Well, for me, I've been looking in depth at some of the news items that align closely with our strategic objectives. Now, you'll know how committed we are at LLG to building sustainable legal departments and investing in the next generation of lawyers. So let's talk about the SQE. Did your trainee fail the SQE, or is your trainee struggling? It may be the case that several of our trainees have already said that they're finding gaps in the delivery of the SQE, and also many of them are finding the exam extremely challenging. Now, you'll be aware of the teething problems that have been reported heavily in the press, and councils and law firms have been urged to keep the faith. Teething problems are quite common when new regimes are rolled out, and it's a case of filling those gaps and improving things rather than just scrapping it all together. So back in March, the SRA talked about the pass rate for SQE1 being 53%. Now that's well down on what you would have seen for pass rates for the LPC, which was previously the main route into the profession. But the SRA insists the tests work well, and their view is that basically the SQE1 is now designed to deliver skills required of a day one solicitor, whereas the LPC was required to deliver the skills required by a day one trainee. So there's an obvious difference. So what does that mean for us in local government? Well, there's some particular issues here that we'd like to focus on. Firstly, there are some very real issues with the EDI aspects of the SQE that have been reported. It doesn't fare well across different ethnic diversities, nor does it work well with neurodiverse students. It's a very, very intense exam, a lot of multiple choice questions. It's a very long exam, it's very stressful. So could that be better? Well, that's a matter for the SRA. But what we're interested in is, does it produce a fit for purpose local government lawyer when people have gone through that track? So is the SQE1 and the SQE2 testing exams that people, is it testing problems that people would encounter in their day-to-day life as a lawyer? Now, it's often been the case that with legal education, the side of the local government lawyer is often missed. It's often aimed more at sort of private sector lawyers. So we know that there's a gap there. And one of the things that we like to do in LLG is actually fill that gap and make this training regime fit for purpose. For us, it's about ensuring local government trainees have the right input and right experience during their time as a trainee. So consequently, in 2024, we're looking to develop some core modules, an online training package to supplement your training within councils and produce lawyers that are better equipped to do the job. So those modules are likely to very much follow our national lead areas like procurement, planning, licensing, etc., to give specific local government skills and academic input in those particular areas, along with some of the soft skills that you also need if you work in local government, like an understanding of political awareness. But we're going to be doing this, obviously, to assist you in training the trainees of the future. So basically, it's a case of watching this space. But sustainability isn't just about building the lawyers of the future. It's about ensuring councils remain financially sustainable, which is something of a hot topic.
Absolutely. Now, Jonathan Carr West from the LGIU has been back in the news. He's quoted in an article by the BBC entitled "Why Do Councils Go Bust and What Happens When They Do?" Now, I was interested to learn the stats on Section 114 reports from this. Apparently, there have been 12 Section 114 notices issued since 2018. So in the last 5 years. Prior to that, there was one in 2000, which was Hackney Council, which included a 2.2 million overspend on the housing revenue account, and waste management and revenue and benefits, which were 3 million in the red. Incidentally, Hackney was the first council to issue 2 Section 114 notices, having issued one back in 1989. But back to present day. The Institute for Government think tank estimates that between 2009 and 2010 and 2021 and 2022, the average fall in spending power for local authorities was 31% when you don't include COVID grants. A report by spending watchdog, the National Audit Office, found that between 2010 and 2011 and 2019 and 2020, average spending fell by 10%. When removing social care, it fell by 25%. Now, according to research by the BBC, the average council now faces a 33 million predicted deficit by 25-26, a rise of 60% from 20 million 2 years ago. So this can only mean that unless councils make some tough decisions immediately, or the government moves to increase financial support, we are going to see more 114 notices. Indeed, rather horrifyingly, all those discretionary services local authorities provide to support their communities could be lost forever. And discretionary services, let's not forget, can often prevent the requirement for mandatory service users.
Well, there is so much tangible value in discretionary services. And what about the pressure from central government being imposed on councils to deliver more, even when they're struggling to deliver the bare minimum? Now, I'm talking specifically about asylum seekers here and the requirement of councils to indicate the number of asylum seekers that they're able to resettle. Councils have been warning the office, the Home Office in this case, not to impose unrealistic targets for these resettlement schemes, and the consultation is coming. The Local Government Association said that Whitehall's forthcoming consultation on the UK's capacity to accommodate refugees through safe and legal routes, which is a requirement of the new Illegal Migration Act, should not end up with councils committed to numbers they cannot manage. So this is really, really tricky. It's definitely one to watch. Additionally, all eyes have been on the climate change agenda and what appears to be a backward step or a foot off the pedal towards our commitment in some directions. Now, in the main media, we have more news about drilling for North Sea oil. From a local authority perspective, there's talk about relaxation of the rules on nutrient neutrality. But Helen, where has your focus been?
Well, during COVID, Deborah, LLG, as you know, started to turn its attention onto the role local authorities could play in tackling climate change. It was far more in the news and engagement was healthy. However, since those first steps, the appetite to learn more and engage has somewhat dwindled. We've been unable, as you know, to run courses or our planned one-day conference due to low numbers. Now, I've considered why this is. And I can only surmise that the relentless barrage of cost of living, tax worries, inflation costs, financial crises in local authorities, service cuts and increased pressure on the day job have all conspired for most, not all, but most in our sector, to be unable to turn their limited time to this issue. Now, Dennis is a big proponent of considering climate change and acting now, and I for one agree with him. So too, it seems, are 6 Portuguese children and young adults who filed a lawsuit in the European Court of Human Rights against 32 governments, including the UK, Russia, Portugal and Switzerland, accusing countries of failing to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions enough to meet the Paris Agreement target of limiting global warming to 1.5 Celsius. This is the first case of its kind, argued on the basis that their fundamental freedom to human rights, so their right to life, privacy and family life, and to be free from discrimination, are being violated due to lack of action. In response, various governments have responded in rebuttal that the claim is outside of the scope of the European Court of Human Rights and that there is no evidence to show how climate change possesses an immediate risk to human life or health. Now, quite how that sits alongside the recent European wildfires and heat waves with the court will be interesting to observe. The court has already rejected a motion by the defendant governments to overtake the fast tracking of the case and to hear only arguments on admissibility of the case. For those who want to follow along, this is the case of Duarte Agostinho and others against Portugal and 32 other states under report number 39371/20. Deborah.
Now, there is so much you can do on climate change as lawyers. You need to think of it as a green thread running through everything you do, every contract you draft, every planning committee you attend, every project you scope. This is not just someone else's problem. Now, with every problem, there is a solution, and currently emerging for a myriad of council problems are solutions rooted in artificial intelligence. So does the thought of artificial intelligence playing a part in the delivery of law in local government excite or terrify you? Do you understand what AI is, how it applies to local government, and how the use of AI can be developed and indeed controlled? Now, let's start with the fundamental principle that AI is a business tool to assist lawyers, not replace them. Using AI could, for example, relieve the administrative burden and leave more time for practicing law, freeing up time for giving proactive advice, training and team building, all of those things on your to-do list that you probably don't get round to as often as you'd like. AI is also starting to be used across other council services, and as a lawyer, you'll need to be able to confidently wrestle with the ethics and the unintended consequences. So let's get confident in this area. At LLG, we've pulled together an extensive briefing note on AI to assist you. And if you have a bit of a thirst for knowledge, Thomson Reuters are offering a session on the legal application and management of AI at the governance conference. And we also have a very practical session from Swindon Council about the adoption of AI in the delivery of council services, saving both money and time whilst allowing the staff to do their jobs properly. It's about enhancement, not replacement, and we will always need emotional intelligence and human interaction to be good lawyers. So exciting or terrifying, you decide. And more on the topic of solution to problems, in this case, complaints.
Yes, that's right. The Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman and the Housing Ombudsman have launched a consultation on a joint complaint handling code, marking the first time that a code has been introduced for all local government functions. The Housing Ombudsman already applies a code, and the consultation forms part of it, becoming a statutory requirement under the Social Housing Regulation Act. Now, the Joint Complaint Handling Code sets out requirements for organisations that it is hoped will allow them to respond to complaints effectively and fairly, and to utilise the data and learning from complaints to drive service improvements. Organisations will be asked to self-assess against the code annually on a comply or explain basis, and publish this on their website or appropriate public forum if an organisation does not host a website. Under the code, organisations must have a single policy for dealing with complaints covered, and individuals must not be treated differently based on the service they are complaining about. This consultation closes on the 23rd of November, and LLG are looking for comments from our membership in order to respond. Sticking with the Ombudsman, it's worth a mention here that the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee has raised concerns over the possibility of a perceived conflict of interest arising from Amadip Somal's intention to chair the Law Society from January 2024, and whether or not she will retain judicial appointment when she takes up the role of Ombudsman next year. Reported in the Local Government Lawyer, in a letter to Local Government Minister Lee Rowley following the hearing, the committee's chair, Clive Betts MP, wrote, "Given the quasi-judicial functions of the Ombudsman Service, there is a risk of a perceived or actual conflict of interest which could arise from Ms Somal holding a role at the Law Society or continuing to work as a judge whilst being the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman." He went on, "Without clarity on these questions, we would be concerned about Ms Somal's credibility in the role. However, we have endorsed Ms Somal because we are confident that you will be able to provide sufficient clarity in your response." Let's see if the Minister responds.
Interesting. Now, we always aim to have a strong professional relationship with the Ombudsman, as it's in all of our interests, and collaboration is another of our key themes. So I hope you found some nuggets of information and sparks of inspiration in today's podcast.
And on that note, you can read more on the items discussed today and many more besides by going to bulletin number 34, available on the LLG website now. So until then, it's goodbye from me.
And from me too.